Some folks call me Earl McKenna. Most who knew me back then are just names on stones now, whispers in the tide. But I'm still here, and I've got story. The sea, she's a keeper of secrets, but every now and then she spits one out. She makes you look at it, makes you hold it, even if it burns your hand. You want to hear about the day the ocean gave up one of its ghosts? I thought you'd pull up a crate. This one needs telling, right? You learn, after enough time on the water, that the sea doesn't shout its intentions. The real danger isn't the 20-foot wave trying to swallow you whole. It's the silence. It's the calm. It was 1956, late in a poor season off Bar Harbor. The lobsters had vanished, gone deep to wherever they go when the water stays too cold for too long, and the cod were thin. I was running the Osprey back then, a 40-foot trawler that had seen better days, much like myself. My partner on deck, my crew, be generous, was Arthur Galloway. Art, we called him. Art was a good man, steady with a gab, but he was a landsman at heart. His worries were always about things you could write in a ledger: the price of fuel, the cost of ice, the mortgage on his little house back in Moorhound. He didn't listen to the ocean. He just listened to the clatter of the winch, hoping it sounded like money. That morning, I felt it, the kind of wrongness that settles in your bones before your eyes can confirm it. "Earl, look at this," Art grumbled, kicking a half-empty crate of scrawny haddock. "We burned 30 gallons of diesel to get this. 30. My kid needs shoes, Earl." "We'll find 'em, Art," I said, but my voice felt hollow. I wasn't looking at the crates. I was looking at the water. It was flat, not just calm, but flat, like a sheet of slate, oily and thick. The air was so still you could hear the hiss of the gull's wings a mile off. There was no swell, no breeze. The Osprey just sat on the water, her engine idling with a low, nervous rumble, the only sound in a world gone quiet. "It's too quiet," I muttered, wiping my hands on an oily rag. "Quiet is good," Art shot back. "Quiet means we're not fighting a nor'easter. Means we can work." "No," I said, pointing with my chin. "This is dead quiet, a waiting quiet. The sea is holding its breath." Art just spat over the rail. He didn't get it. He saw the world in dollars and cents. I saw it in signs and portents. We were further out than we should have been, pushing north toward the cluster of jagged granite teeth known as Shipwreck Rock. It wasn't a rock, really, but a small forsaken island, just big enough for the lighthouse that stood on it. The light had been automated for 10 years by then, a cold electric flash replacing the old kerosene lamp. But before that, well, that place had a history. No local trawler went near the rock if they could help it. The currents there were wicked, known for snagging nets, pulling boats onto the shoals. But the old stories were worse than the currents. "We're pulling this last line and heading in," I told Art. "We're tempting fate out here." "Tempting what?" "The fish ain't biting closer to shore," Art argued. "Let's try one more pass closer to the rock. Old Man Hemlock said he pulled a huge haul of cod there last week." "Old Man Hemlock's a liar, and his boat's newer than ours," I said, my grip tightening on the wheel. "We're not going closer. That place is bad water." "Because of a ghost story," Art scoffed. "Because of what happened?" I cried, my voice dropping. He knew the legend. Everyone did. The silent Lightkeeper. Back in the 20s, the light was kept by a man named Elias Vance. A solitary type, they said, who only came to the mainland for supply. He wasn't alone out. He had his wife, Sarah. The story went that she was a musician, played the violin, and that on clear nights you could hear the music drifting over the water. Then, in the winter of 23, a brutal storm hit. A rogue wave, they figured, swept her right off the narrow dock while she was securing their dory. Elias, they say, went mad with grief. He searched the waters for weeks. He stopped lighting the lamp. He just sat on the rocks, staring at the gray water, waiting. When the Coast Guard finally went to check, the lighthouse was empty. No note. No sign of a struggle, just a violin case on the bed and the door wide open to the sea. They never found Elias Vance. The fisherman who came after said the place was haunted, not by a wailing spirit, but by a silence. They said the sea-birds wouldn't land there, that the fog clung to it even on sunny days, and some claimed that on the stillest nights you could still hear that violin crying for the man who was waiting for her. They said the sea took Sarah, but it refused Elias, kept him wandering the deep, still searching. It's just a story, Earl, to scare kids away from the rocks, Art said. We need this haul. It's a story that kept my grandfather and my father off that shoal, and it'll keep me off it too, I snapped. Start the winch, Art. We're pulling, and we're gone. Art muttered something under his breath about being superstitious, but he moved to the hydraulic control. The winch groaned, metal straining against metal, and the heavy net began its slow climb from the deep. I watched the cable, coated in green slime, wind onto the drum. The tension was good, steady. Then, about halfway up, the winch motor suddenly screamed. The entire shuddered, listing hard to starboard. The cable went taut as a guitar string. "Damn it!" Art yelled, fighting the controls. "We're snagged! I told you! Snagged on the bottom!" "No," I said, my stomach turning to ice. I pointed at the depth sounder. We were in 400 feet of water. The net was only 200 feet down. "We're not on the bottom, Art. We've caught something in mid-water, something heavy. A dead whale? Debris from a wreck?" "Shut off the winch," I ordered. The cable was humming, a high-pitched pinging sound that meant it was near its breaking point. Art cut the power, and the Osprey settled back, groaning under the immense dead weight hanging off her side. "What do we do?" Art whispered, his bravado gone, replaced by the pale look of a man staring at a $5,000 net about to snap. "If we cut it, we're ruined. We try to bring it up. Slow," I said. "Just easy. Easy, Art. Whatever it is, we bring it up gentle." I throttled the engine just enough to keep us steady against the drag. Art engaged the winch on its lowest, slowest setting. For 10 minutes, the only sound was the clack, clack, clack of the drum and the agonizing whine of the hydraulic. The boat listed, the rail dipping dangerously close to the oily water. "I see it!" Art shouted, pointing. A dark mass was rising through the gray-green gloom. It was tangled, a horrible, bundled mess of netting, seaweed, and thing else. It wasn't a whale. It wasn't debris. As it broke the surface, the stench hit us. Not the normal smell of fish and brine. This was the smell of the deep bottom, of mud and decay, a cold, iron-like smell. The net swung over the water, dripping, and we saw it. Wedged between a snagged lobster pot and a mass of kelp, twisted in the ropes, was a man. He was pale, a bluish-white that didn't look human. He was dressed in clothes I hadn't seen since I was a boy looking at photos in my grandfather's attic. Heavy wool trousers, thick-soled boots, and a dark, buttoned-up jacket, like something a farolero, a lightkeeper, would wear. Art made a gagging sound and turned away. My heart was a hammer against my ribs. He's been down there a long time, I meant. With the last of the hydraulics, we swung the boom over and lowered the bulging net onto the deck. It landed with a wet, heavy thud. The few fish trapped with him, silver hake and pollock, flapped weakly against his still form. "Get the radio, Art," I said, my voice thick. "Call the guard. Tell them we found a body." Art, white as a sheet, scrambled for the cabin. I stood there, alone on the deck with the dead quiet of the sea and this thing it had given us. I couldn't take my eye. He was rigid, his arms locked at his side. His eyes were closed, the lids a faint, waxy blue. He looked preserved, as if the cold deep had held him just as he was. A terrible, cold pity washed over me. It felt wrong, him being tangled like that. I reached for my gutting knife, not to cut him, but to cut the ropes away. He deserved that much. He deserved to be free of the net. I leaned in close, the smell of the abyss filling my lungs. I reached out and laid my hand on his shoulder to steady myself, my fingers brushing the cold, wet wool of his chin. That's the man I pulled from the sea, the man who was cold, stiff, and dead. He opened his eyes. I grew up on stories of men lost to the sea. You see them on the next. They're just a name on a church. The sea takes them, and mostly the sea keeps them. You get used to death. You have to. It's the price of living off the salt. But this wasn't. This was something breaking the rule. The instant my fingers touched the waterlogged wool of his jacket, those eyes snapped open. It wasn't a blink. It wasn't an awakening. It was mechanical, like two pale shells hinging open, and the eyes underneath. God forgive me, I'll never forget those eyes. They were a milky, clouded blue, like the deep ice in a frozen lake. No pupil, no focus. And they were staring right at me, I yelled. I'm not ashamed to admit it. It was a short, sharp sound torn right out of me. I fell backward, scrambling on the slime and flapping fish, my back hitting the ice hold. My gutting knife flew from my hand and skittered across the deck, coming to rest near the man's boot. In the cabin, Art was shouting into the radio. Bar Harbor Coast Guard, this is the Osprey, over. We're about 8 miles northeast of Shipwreck Rock. We've found a body. Over. A floater. Art, screamed, my voice cracking. Art, get off the radio and get out here. I'm busy, Earl, he yelled back, his voice high with panic. They're asking our position. Now! The sound of my voice must have cut through. I heard the microphone clatter to the cabin floor. A second later, Art stumbled out, his face white. What is it? Did the cable snap? Are we sinking? He stopped talking when he saw what I was pointing at. I was huddled against the ice hold, pointing with a shaking finger. The man was sitting up. He had moved from the tangled pile of netting where we dumped him. He was sitting bolt upright on the deck, his legs stiff out in front of him, seawater streaming from his ancient clothes. The fish flopped uselessly in his lap, and those milky blue eyes were scanning the deck, moving slowly, methodically. They passed over me, passed over Art, and then fixed on the gray sky above. Art made a sound I've never heard before or since, a sort of strangled half-sob, half-scream. What is that, Earl? What in God's name is that? I don't know, I whispered, and I didn't. I was looking at something impossible, and my brain was refusing to believe my eyes. The man was cold. He was stiff. He'd come from the deep, cold water. He was dead. I knew what dead was, and dead didn't sit up. That's when he spoke. First, it was just a sound, a horrible bubbling noise, as if the seawater itself was being forced from his lungs. Dark salt water ran from the corners of his mouth, staining his pale chin. He took a single, shuddering breath, a sound like the sea pulling back from the dragging of pebbles, sand, and then the word came, so low it was almost the wind, but so clear in dead, still air that it burned my ears. Sarah. It wasn't a shout, it was a breath from someone who'd been waiting for an answer for a long, long time. Art Galloway lost his mind. Throw him back, he shrieked, his eyes wild. He grabbed one of the tuna gaffs we kept lashed to the cabin. Whatever it is, throw it back in the sea. Now! He lunged. I threw myself in front of him, grabbing the wooden handle of the gaff with both hands. No! I yelled. Are you crazy? It's a man. That is not a man, Earl. He spat, his face inches from mine, tears of pure terror streaming down his cheeks. Men don't do this. Men don't come back. Put the gaff down, Art. As we struggled, stumbling on the slick deck, the thing, moved its head, its milky eyes fixed on us. The confusion on its face was replaced by something I can only describe as sorrow, a sorrow as deep as the ocean floor. He raised one hand, stiff and slow. He wasn't threatening us. He was pointing past us, past our boat to the east, toward Shipwreck Rock. Sarah, he whispered again, and this time there was an urgency to it, a raw pain. I heard the music. Art froze. His hands went limp on the gaff. It clattered to the deck. Music? He whispered, looking at me. Earl, what music? I didn't answer. I was staring at Elias Vance. It had to be. The sea refused him, the legend said. And now he was on my boat. "What did you hear?" I asked, my voice sounding strange in my own ears. Elias's eyes turned to me. They scanned my face, and for 1 second, swear to God, I felt like he was seeing me, really seeing me. "The violin," he rasped, water bubbling at his lips. "She is waiting." Art grabbed my arm, his fingernails digging into my skin. "Earl, for the love of God, let's get out of here. Let's dump him back and tell the Coast Guard we lost him, that the net tore. Anything." "No," I said, shaking. I turned and moved to the cabin. "What are you doing?" Art yelped, following me. "I'm starting the engine," I said, my hand shaking so bad I could barely get the key in the ignition. "We're going back to port?" His voice was filled with a desperate, shaky hope. I looked at him, and then back at the man sitting on my... staring at the distant lighthouse. It was the only thing in the world. "No," I said, and I threw the engine into gear. The Osprey shuddered and began to move. "We pulled him out. We have to finish this." "Finish what, Earl? What do you mean?" I pointed the bow of the Osprey not toward the harbor, not toward the safety of Bar Harbor. I pointed it straight at the granite teeth of Shipwreck Rock. "He's been looking for her for 30 years, Art," I said, my throat tight. "I heard him. He said he heard the music. We're taking him home. You can fight a storm. You can patch a hull. You can ride out a swell. You're fighting something you can see, something solid. But what we brought back to Bar Harbor that evening, it was heavier than any storm. It was a weight of time, of grief, all wrapped in the cold, wet wool of a man who shouldn't have been there. The run back to Shipwreck Rock took maybe 20 minutes. It felt like a year. Art stayed huddled by the cabin door, his eyes wide, one hand clutching a small silver cross he wore under his shirt. He wouldn't look at Elias. I kept the throttle steady. I didn't know what I was doing. Not really. It was just a feeling, a deep, pulling certainty in my gut. The same way I know a storm's coming. This man, he didn't belong to us. He didn't belong to the Coast Guard. He belonged to that rock, to the water that swirled around its base. Elias Vance sat on my deck. He didn't move. He just sat. His milky eyes were locked on the approaching lighthouse, a single dark tower against the pale, sick-looking sky. He hadn't spoken again since he'd said her name. He'd mentioned the music. As we got closer, the air changed. The still, oily calm was replaced by a sudden, creeping cold. Fog began to rise from the water. Not a rolling bank of fog, but thin, ghostly fingers climbing up from the surface like steam off dry ice. It wrapped around the Osprey, silencing the engine's thrum, muffling the world. "Earl, don't go closer," Art whispered, his voice trembling. "The shoals will be wrecked." "We'll be fine," I said, though my knuckles were white on the wheel. "We're not docking. We're just saying goodbye." I cut the engine about 100 yards off the landing. The boat drifted in the sudden, absolute silence of fog. The only sound was a lap, lap, lap of water against the hull. I stepped out of the cabin onto the deck. The fog was so thick I could barely see Art to the opposite rail, but I could see Elias. He was closer. He turned his head. Slowly, that same stiff, mechanical movement, his pale, sightless eyes found me. He raised his hand again, not pointing this time, but open, a gesture of thanks, of release, and then I heard it. Art heard it too. His head snapped up, his eyes searching the fog. It was faint, so faint you could mistake it for the wind, if there had been any wind. A high, thin, lonely sound, the crying of a single violin string. It wasn't on the island. It sounded like it was coming from everywhere at once. From the water, from the fog, from the air itself. "Sarah," Elias. And the word was a sigh of peace. He looked back at the lighthouse, now just a shadow in the gray. He leaned forward. "Earl, no!" Art screamed, but I didn't move to stop him. It wasn't my place. Elias Vance, the man who had been dead for 30 years, tilted forward off the deck and slid almost gently back into the sea. There was barely a splash. The oily water swirled once, then went flat, was gone. The violin music, if it was ever there at all, stopped. The fog seemed to thin, just a little. I stood there for a full minute, my heart feeling like a lead weight in Art. Great gulping breaths. He's gone. It's over. Let's go home, Earl. Please, God, let's just go home. I put my hand on the throttle and turned the Osprey around. The radio call had been heard of. When we rounded the breakwater into Bar Harbor, the dock was waiting. The fog had followed us, clinging to the water, turning the familiar harbor into a strange gray place. The lights on the pier looked fuzzy and distant. Two men were standing there, their shapes dark against the gloom. Sheriff Mark Bishop, a big man whose coat always seemed too tight, and Dr. Owen, the town physician, thin as a rail, carrying his black leather bag. "Earl!" Bishop yelled as I cut the engine and glided toward the pilings. "What in blazes is this about? You found a body?" Art threw the bowline, his hand shaking so badly it took him 3 tries. I secured the stern. We did," I said. My voice sounded dead. "Well, where is it?" Dr. Owen snapped, peering onto my deck. He was an impatient man, didn't like being called away from his dinner. Art stammered. We lost it." Sheriff Bishop's face darkened. "You lost it? You call the Coast Guard, report a 1078, and then you lose the body? What kind of game are you playing, McKenna?" "It wasn't a game!" Art suddenly shrieked, his voice cracking. "You don't understand. It was him, the Lightkeeper, Elias Vance. He was in the net." Dr. Owen and Sheriff Bishop exchanged a look, the kind of look you give a drunk or a madman. "He was dead, right?" Bishop asked, talking to me slower this time. "He was. Cold, stiff, been in the water a long time. But he woke up." Art was yelling now, waving his arms. "He sat up. He talked. He asked for Sarah. We saw him. Earl saw him." Dr. Owen sighed, exasperated. "Son, I've seen 100 drowned men. The gases build up. The body, it moves, twitches, spasms. It can even make the air escapes. It's a grisly thing, but it's not waking up." "He sat up," Art insisted. "He pointed. He talked about music." "Arthur," I said, and my voice was quiet, but it cut through his panic. He stopped, his mouth open. "Go home. Go see your wife." "But Earl." "Go home." Sheriff Bishop was watching me, his eyes narrow. "Earl, what happened out there? You're not the type to get spooked by escaping gases." I looked at my deck, still wet and covered in scales and a few dead hake. It looked empty, normal. "We pulled him up in the net," I said, choosing my words carefully. "He was tangled. He looked like—" I paused. "He looked like he'd been down there since 1923. "Elias Vance," Bishop murmured, nodding. "So the legend's true. He did end up in the water." "And then?" Dr. Owen pressed. "We were bringing him in." I lied. "We got hit by a swell near the rock. The net was swinging. The body shifted. It just rolled off the rail, went right back down. We searched for half an hour. It's gone." Art stared at me, his face a mask of disbelief. He couldn't understand why I was lying, but I knew. I knew you couldn't tell people like Bishop and Owen the truth. You couldn't tell them that a dead man sat on your deck and listened for a violin. They'd take your boat. They'd take your license. They'd call you mad. Dr. Owen snapped his bag shut. "A waste of time. Shock. That's what's got your man Art there. He saw something traumatic and his mind's playing tricks." Sheriff Bishop just nodded, his gaze heavy on me. "A shame. Would have been good to close that case. Put a name on the stone." He sighed. "All right, Earl. Get your deck cleaned up. Go home." They turned and walked away, their footsteps echoing on the wooden planks, disappearing into the fog. Art and I stood there in the silence. "Why, Earl," he finally whispered, "why did you lie?" "We saw it." "What did we see, Art?" I asked, coiling the stern line. "We saw a dead man. We saw fog. We heard the wind. That's all." "No," he said, shaking his head. "No, I know what I saw." "And what good does it do?" I said, turning to. "Who will ever believe you? They'll say you're crazy. They'll say I'm crazy. Some things, Art, some things the sea shows you, it only shows you, and you're meant to keep 'em." He looked at me, his eyes full of a fear I'd never seen before. a fear that wouldn't wash off. I started hosing down the deck, washing the slime and the scales over the side. Art just stood there. Finally, he turned and walked off the boat, his steps heavy. I was alone, just me and the thump of the bilge pump. As I was spraying down the spot where Elias had sat, my boot hit something small and metal. It was my gutting, and next to it, half hidden under a coil of rope, was something else. I bent down and picked it up. It was a small, round brass locket, green with age and salt water corrosion. It must have fallen from his jacket pocket when he sat up, or when he went over the side. My fingers were numb and cold, but I managed to work the clasp. It snapped open. Inside, protected by a tiny cracked piece of glass, faded photograph, a tintype, a young woman, her hair pulled back, a smile that looked small and sad. On the other side, scratched into the brass, were two sets of initials, EV and SV, and below them, a date, 1923. I closed the lock. My breath hitched. It was real, all of it. The man, the name, the story. I hadn't imagined it. Art hadn't imagined. I stood there for a long time, the locket heavy in my palm. Then, with a flick of my wrist, I threw it as far as I could into the harbor. It made a tiny ploop, was gone. Secret, you gotta give 'em back to the sea. Art Galloway sold the Osprey with me at the end of that season. He took his wife and kid and moved to Arizona. Last I heard, he was selling insurance in a town so dry you couldn't find a puddle in a rainstorm. He'd never set foot on a boat again. And me? I kept fishing. I'm still here. But I never went near Shipwreck Rock again. Sometimes, though, on the nights when the air is dead still and the water is like black glass, I'll sit out here and I'll listen. And I'll wonder, did Elias really hear her violin? Or did she, somewhere deep in the cold, finally hear him? I guess that's just one of those questions the ocean keeps the answer to. The sea teaches you a lot of things, but the biggest one is this. There's a line between the living and the dead, and it's thinner than you think. We spend our lives shouting at the world, making all kinds of noise. The truth, the real truth, it's quiet. It waits in the deep, and sometimes it just wants to be heard. Sometimes all a lost soul needs is for someone to listen and to finally let them go home. If you enjoyed this old man's tale, and if you respect the sea, well, maybe subscribe to the channel. Give the video a like so other folks can find it. It lets me know you're still listening.